United States is, how do I get a full scholarship? And the
Right.
reality is, realistically, that's a huge, huge challenging proposition. And so I think that's the biggest myth we get a lot, is that there's just an endless supply of free education.
Return on investment thing. But you have to look at the holistic way. Is like return on investment is not just getting the money that you've invested back. Hello, everyone. I have with me today Daniel Marschner. He is Director of International Recruitment at Loyola Marymount University in US. This is a university based out of California. And Daniel is a very senior recruiter. I've been having to meet him at so many different places, conferences, and his thoughts on this whole recruitment, international education have been considered to be really thought-provoking and kind of a landmark talks he's been doing. He's also an incoming president-elect to IACAC, that is International Association of Career and College Counseling. And it's a pleasure to have you, Daniel, with us today.
Well, it's great to be with you, Pavak. Thank you for calling me senior. That really makes me feel like my age. I appreciate that. No, it's great to be with you. And it's been really inspiring to be hearing about your experiences at the University of Waterloo and being, and having had the chance to work in higher education in India and transition to higher education in Canada has been very exciting as well. But yeah, it was really wonderful to be part of the session we had today regarding, opportunities for funding and really the important conversation about cost. I mean, I think you had some really interesting things to say about how the cost of education is rising and so incredibly fast, and really how to really think about how to approach the cost of education in a more realistic manner.
I think both of us have been battling with this question when we meet the students and the parents, is like, why is the cost of education so high?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we help how do we afford higher education into the systems like US and Canada, and how does that whole thing work? Are there any ways to fund them, or are there any ways that we can provide this quality education in US, Canada, and rest of the world, but make it more affordable?
Mm-hmm.
So
mm-hmm.
I think my answer to them is usually, please understand the global scenario where we look at the inflation figures, and inflation figures are more or less that you read in every country, which is like 3%, 4%, 5%. But these are general inflation figure overall. And when you look at the sectorial inflation, the higher education, it is second only to the healthcare inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So a healthcare surgery would cost probably, it rises 10 to 15% on a year-on-year basis, whereas the second is higher education cost, whether it is in US, whether it is in Canada, whether it is in most part of the world. And this is where they have to think about that universities cannot be able to provide large scholarship to too many people. And that is where we have to find out some different ways to fund our children and make sure that they get quality education, yet it remains affordable for the parents. So how about your thoughts on scholarships and the whole scenario? How does that work in an American system for students?
Well, I think that challenge has always been, from my perspective, the U.S. is incredibly complex in terms of the system of higher education, right? And so I think the question I always get from sometimes from students who have no real understanding of the United States is, how do I get a full scholarship? And the reality is, realistically, that's a huge, huge challenging proposition. And so I think that's the biggest myth we get a lot, is that there's just an endless supply of free education just sitting there that we just have to find. And realistically, I think that's important in consideration to be realistic and say it's an investment in your future. And again, at the end of the day, institutions, yes, there are certainly opportunities. I want to get the sense that that's impossible altogether. But to be realistic about the fact that to really attend, a phenomenal institution at a cost that's really minimal is a very, very challenging proposition.
Right.
However, I think the other thing is, it's important to really realize that there are so many different possibilities to consider. We work really closely, for example, at my university with transfer partners.
Okay.
And so community colleges, for example, are great institutions that really offer a phenomenal educational experience at a much lower cost. And so for students who are concerned about that cost overall, if they're very price sensitive, that's a really great option.
And that's the same quality education.
The same quality education, the same degree at the end of the day, all those kind of things, right? but also just realizing that there are, there's always a handful of household names everyone knows about institutions in the United States, but there's so many more out there that it can offer a really great educational experience. And so really want to focus more on the idea of thinking about education as an investment, as an opportunity for your future, as something that's really important to think about where this will take you, and be willing to contribute, to really recognize the value of it from that sense. And so looking into things like, where do students go when they graduate? What kind of network will they have available to them? What are the kind of things students go on to do once they leave the institution? That's the kind of thing that we really focus on quite a bit. Even things as simple as, data points of what's the average salary when a student leaves the campus. And at least that helps students and families realize, I'm not by any stretch suggesting that it's not an important investment or a easy one to make for a lot of families, but it's one that's really important to keep that aspect in mind. And I know for you, certainly the Waterloo having co-ops, that really helps to address a lot of those concerns. And so that's certainly a very, very strong possibility for students to consider as well.
That's a good point. You're talking about co-op. I mean, that is where Waterloo is known for, and probably some other Canadian universities getting into it. So essentially, the co-op works in a manner whereby a student alternate between work and study term. Especially with Canadian immigration system, they do get a special co-op study permit where they can actually work and study legally in Canada alternatively. So Waterloo provides that opportunity whereby they alternate between work and study terms. To us, the biggest advantage is, we are a relatively new university. We are not like 500 years old university and 200 years old university. I think that is where our resources to provide scholarships are limited. So we do have scholarships, but they are very small scholarships, and that is where we are finding this innovative ways to provide this opportunity to students in terms of doing their co-op. So in a 4.5-year degree program, student would alternate between work and study term. Thereby, they would have about 5 to 6 different terms, each of co-op terms, each of about 4 months. So students end up working for about 24 months while they are studying, and this is all paid work. So that is where 24 months is about 2 years. So by the time they graduate from University of Waterloo, they have work experience of about 2 years, for which they have earned money, which helps them to finance their education. But apart from that, student has a resume ready. So once they're out in the industry, they're no longer what is termed as fresher. They know how do you work in a company, in a team, in an environment. And they have a resume of 5 different companies, probably 5 different profiles that they had. And that is where they are able to also finance their education, but they are becoming industry ready. So this is a kind of a work integrated learning that we provide at Waterloo, and I'm sure there are a bunch of other universities across the world, especially in North America, have this model of co-op. So students they learn, and they become industry ready by the time they graduate.
Absolutely.
So that is essentially how the co-op model works at Waterloo. But I would want to have your thoughts, Dan, on how do you drive this conversation with parents who are like, does your university have a full scholarship, or how do I afford this education? So how do you talk to the parents?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a challenging conversation, of course, right? I think that there are legitimate questions for why, and I think we all recognize there's a lot of different factors for why the costs are set the way they are. I think the other thing to keep in mind too is, certainly in my institution, for example, if you look at a classroom of students, the reality is that each person in the classroom is probably paying a different amount of money to be there. And so just to recognize the fact that I think some students and families initially see that cost, what they see on paper, and say, it's just assume that's what they're going to be charged. And so just being realistic about that conversation and realizing that there are a lot of resources out there. But also, again, to look into the various things and think through what are the things that are most important to you as a family. And also to, I think it's always challenging as well, because sometimes we have the experience, or I have the experience, where the family, realistically, this is not the best choice for them. And so sometimes it's a conversation around, maybe starting off at a place, like my institution is not the best opportunity for you financially, but there's a ways you can get there eventually, right?
Oh, wonderful. So
Or
you're quite honest
I
about
mean,
it.
but
Yeah.
because again, the reality is, having someone come to the campus, and then the worst case scenario for us is a student come from the campus and be there for a semester or a year, and then have to drop out because of
Yeah.
financial concerns, right?
Yeah.
And so we try to be realistic about that to some extent, and that's actually how the U.S. Student visa system is based as well, and that they do expect that students can pay for at least one full year up front and try to mitigate these kind of concerns, right?
All right.
But I mean, there certainly are resources for students once they arrive on campus as well. Things like being a resident assistant helps with housing costs. Sometimes institutions will have scholarships for continuing students, depending upon the type of internship experience they can gain. But the other part of the conversation too is around the idea of need-based aid, which can be available in some circumstances for international students, but it's fairly rare.
Right.
And so that's the other part to keep in mind as well, is that at the end of the day, I think most institutions in the U.S. would have limited amount of resources to support international students, especially. And so again, I think it's really important for the family to have that honest conversation amongst each other, and really be realistic about what is possible. And also what they're willing to contribute to make a student's dreams a reality.
Right.
And so we always try to make it in a situation where they can be successful once they come to campus as best we can. Because again, at the end of the day, it doesn't help us, doesn't help the student if it's a situation where they don't feel like we weren't realistic with them at the beginning of the experience. And again, so that's really trying to have these conversations. It's not an easy conversation to have, of course. So in terms of final points, and again, I think I think the most important thing to keep in mind always when you're having these kind of conversations, when again, and sometimes they can be challenging, but I certainly appreciate that. But just to really reinforce with students and families that we are happy to have those conversations, right?
Right.
And just to be realistic about, and recognizing that connecting with someone at the institution who can really talk through, what is possible, I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
And I think that really speaks to, we talk about, at least in the U.S., we use the term in the profession of admissions counselor, and sometimes that counseling piece is kind of, secondary. But I think in this sense, it is really important to think about that counseling aspect of really thinking about, financially, socially, academically, what's the type of place that really makes sense for you as a student. And I think that's that conversation, which I think, again, can be a challenging conversation, but is really, really important.
So that's a part of the right fit thing, right fit, not just academically, but financially, aspiration wise, and in terms of what are their expectations at the end of the program that they're looking at. Yeah, when I do this conversation, I also talk about, as I said, that college education or university education is not just looking from one barometer of like return on investment thing, but you have to look at the holistic way. Is like return on investment is not just getting the money that you've invested back, while it is of course a major concern because parents have been taking debt, but they should also look at the experience that they are getting, the opportunities that they are getting at this university, and the resources that university provides for the amount of money that they are investing. So it's not spending money, it is people invest in their careers and their life, which is going to be with their life for next 30-40 years of work life of a student. So I mean, taking a very short-term view of very high fees, I cannot afford it, or I when will I be able to repay my loan? I think we are in an era today where higher education cost is going up day by day, and somewhere we have to rethink our way of thinking, how do we fund our children's education? And therefore, it's a very family conversation with parents, students, guidance counselor probably, where they can help us to navigate this conversation. And that is where it boils down to all the things that we talked about. Anything else you would want to add just to conclude this discussion in terms of some other context in some other countries, or maybe something that you probably want to add on this?
No, yeah. I mean, again, I just think it's important to really keep that whole that aspect in mind. Again, I think it's really important to make about really thinking about an investment, not just in financial terms,
right?
But again, going back to the idea of what's the goal of higher education, right? And ideally, you're setting the student up for success and for a future where they can really, whether they have connections from students around the world, whether they have that broader perspective,
Right.
whether they're connecting with people and with professors who can really help to expand their perspectives and their horizons. I think that's just a really important aspect to keep in mind. So I absolutely think that higher education is worth the investment. I just think it's important to really be open-minded and broad in your thinking about things. And I think sometimes students really and parents really find a lot of frustration when they fixate on one place or one experience.
Right.
And again, I think just being open to those different possibilities and realizing that
Yeah.
it's not necessarily only about one place that really you can find a lot of success.
Look around,
Yes.
find opportunities, and look at the ways to fund your education. Great. Thank you so much, Dan. It was a pleasure chatting with you on this.
Absolutely.
And I think this discussion becomes a lot of valuable for a lot of people who are listening to us today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Pleasure
Absolutely.
to be with you.
Absolutely.